It's the 13th of September 2018. I want to take you back. I want to take you back a long time. When I was 11, back in 1966, I was aware that there was a lot of happenings going on. There was a proto-underground musical scene happening. And there were bands like the Pretty Things and the Kinks and of course the Beatles and the Stones and the Who. And there was even mutterings going on amongst my peer group of exotic names from America like Jefferson Airplane and Grateful Dead. But this was late 66, early 67. And then one day I came back from school. I was in senior school, at the start of senior school, and it was a program called Top of the Pops, featuring all the latest pop groups. And I was sat watching Top of the Pops, doing my homework, and then all of a sudden this guy came on Top of the Pops. And it was one of the most seminal performances ever seen on British television. This tall black guy with a big afro got his guitar out and started playing. And my jaw just dropped and I just looked at the screen and I didn't believe what I was seeing. At which point, one of my parents come in and says, "You're not watching this rubbish, this is disgusting," and turn the television off. But it was too late, the damage was done. I'd seen Jimi Hendrix live on television. So, as an 11-year-old coming 12 to see Hendrix was live, was an even if it was just on television, was an amazing experience. So here's the horoscope of Jimi Hendrix. Born on the 27th of November 1942 at 10:15 in the morning in Seattle Heights, Washington State. 47 degrees north 49, 122 west 19. Making him Sagittarius Sun, Sagittarius Rising, Void Moon in late Cancer. Now, Hendrix's chart had a number of weird aspects. Firstly, he was born with the sun in the middle of a triple conjunction of Mercury and Venus, all in the first 7 degrees of Sagittarius. Mercury at 2, Sun at 4, Venus at 7. Thing is, it was opposite Uranus at 2 degrees of Gemini and Saturn at 9 degrees of Gemini. So he was born with a really strong Venus-Saturn opposition, which perhaps explains the lack of relationship he had with his parents. He was also born with a pretty much exact opposition of Mercury to Uranus, which goes a long way to explaining his mental attitudes towards his bohemian lifestyle and his idiosyncratic, borderline eccentric, completely futuristic and novel attitude towards musical expression. And with the sun opposite both Uranus and Saturn, I get why he was such an unusual character. Sun opposite Uranus, Mercury opposite Uranus, Sun opposite Saturn, Venus opposite Saturn. Wow. And a void moon. And of course he was a bit of a ladies' man, and he was a prolific user of various substances. And there's many written testimonies to how when he was consuming both drugs and alcohol, and particularly when he was consuming alcohol on its own, he could be quite violent. A number of women were the victim of his physical abuse when he was on alcohol. He was also a prolific substance abuser. It was mainly cannabis and psychedelics, although he did dabble with cocaine and heroin. He didn't really have boundaries. Sun opposite Uranus, Mercury opposite Uranus. Rules were made for breaking as far as he was concerned. And he never lived long enough for Saturn to really kick in and for him to find his own boundaries. He just fought against the boundaries imposed on him by others. He had a lovely Neptune. Neptune trine Uranus, trine Saturn, sextile Venus, sextile Sun, sextile Mercury, pretty damn strong. Venus, Neptune in the ninth house is inspiration for his music. It did come almost from another realm. I mean, I'm biased. I'm old enough to remember seeing him live on television, and I still consider Jimi Hendrix to be the best guitarist the world has ever produced. And I will say that to my dying day. I am a Jimi Hendrix fan. But he was almost from another planet. He broke the mould, threw it away, and he never conformed. And millions of people have tried to follow him, but no one succeeded. He died young. Jimi Hendrix died 27 years old. He died on the, let me get it right, on the 18th of September 1970 in London. Now that night he'd consumed half a bottle of wine. He'd been smoking cannabis. He'd also consumed quite a lot of barbiturates. Depending on which story you read, he'd either consumed 6 times the recommended dose or 18 times the recommended dose, but he'd taken a lot of barbiturates. His girlfriend at the time found him unconscious and called the ambulance, which arrived really fast. And Jimi Hendrix was alive when he was put in the ambulance. By the time he got to hospital, he was dead. Now, the post-mortem recorded an open verdict. Popular myth has it that he died in the ambulance, and he died as a result of being inappropriately placed in the ambulance. He wasn't, bearing in mind he was out of his head on barbiturates, which is silly, but even so, he wasn't laid down, he was sat up. As a result, his head went because he was out of control and he choked to death. Alternatively, his heart gave out, depending on which version you read. Regardless of the fact, he died that evening on the 18th of September in London. And a cursory look at his chart doesn't show a lot of reasons attributing the death to anything astrological, until you think, wait a minute, 6 weeks before his death, there was an eclipse at 7 degrees of Leo, conjunct his Pluto. 4 weeks before he was born, there was an eclipse of the sun at 9 degrees of Virgo, and on the day he was born, Mars in the sky was at 9 degrees of Virgo. So Mars was eclipsing the eclipse point of 2 weeks before. Now 9 degrees of Virgo doesn't hit Hendrix's chart, it squares his Saturn weekly. But the eclipse before that, 7 degrees of Leo, was on top of his natal Pluto. When Jimi Hendrix died, his progressed moon was at 5 degrees of Leo, conjunct both his progressed and his natal Pluto, and the eclipse point of early August 1970. So similar to Van Gogh, Hendrix died when the progressed moon in his horoscope was conjunct his Pluto. Not as exact as Van Gogh. And Van Gogh intended to take his own life, I'm sure. Hendrix obviously did not, but he was out of control. The best die young. Why am I getting old? So thank you, Jimi Hendrix. I still listen to your music every so often. You still inspire me. Excuse me while I kiss the sky.